One of the things that I've noticed a lot of other media do, and I have tried to really banish from my team's work, is a headline that says something about how this dish is so good, quote, you won't miss the meat, and that just makes my skin crawl.
This is Taste. I'm your host, Matt Rodbard. Joe Yonan is the food and dining editor of The Washington Post. It's a big job covering an outstanding food city, so it's pretty remarkable that Joe finds time in the margins to write cookbooks every couple of years. Much respect, Joe. On this episode, we talk about his latest cookbook, the ambitious Mastering the Art of Plant-Based Cooking, among other topics. It's a really great talk, and we dig into the Washington, D.C. dining scene, this impossible to figure out beyond meat world we currently live in, and we discuss many recipes from this terrific new book. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Joe Yonan, welcome to This Is Taste. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks so much for having me, Matt. Really appreciate it.
Well, I'm extremely excited to talk about this book, Mastering the Art of Plant-Based Cooking. I mean, if you drop it from your height level, it's going to make a very loud sound. It is an amazing book in many ways. It's adventurous. It's packed with over 300 recipes. And really, you deliver on the promise, Mastering the Art of Plant-Based Cooking. A lot of cookbooks like to promise but don't deliver. But my man, you delivered.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm really glad to hear that. Sometimes, when a book is about to come out and you can't change anything because it's too late, but you don't know what people think, you're like, is it good? So I appreciate it.
Well, you know what? We're going to get into the book, and I have so many questions to ask about specific recipes, how you came to this framing, how you came to the project. But I could not resist talking about Washington, D.C. You're the food and dining editor at the Washington Post and been for years. And I just want to get a sense of what's good restaurant-wise in Washington, D.C. right now.
Oh, man, we just have a great scene. There's just, I think I saw some stat from our local restaurant association that last year more restaurants opened in DC per capita than in any other market in the country, which is pretty incredible. So I think we're recovering from the pandemic pretty well. And the creativity is honestly, it's unmatched. My favorites right now, I'd hate to just immediately go for people who've won national awards, but I was a fan of Michael Rafiti at Albi before he was named the best chef in the country. I was very excited that he was. Palestinian cooking, just incredible. Oyster, of course, is right up my alley. Plant-based plus bivalves, Rob Rubba. There's some long-standing restaurants that are just killer. One of my all-time favorites is Centralina, Amy Brandwine's modern Italian restaurant in City Center. Just think her cooking is pitch perfect. There's a new modern Mexican restaurant called Pascal that everybody is rightfully obsessed with. There's some really cool Italian American in DC. There's a place called Caruso's Grocery that might be my favorite Italian American restaurant anywhere. So there's lots.
I love this collection of restaurants, and it's such a reminder of how the district is so rich in restaurants and culture, and really it's a town that's obviously driven by government, by politics, but you really, really got to get excited about these restaurants in D.C. I feel like, let me ask you, what's it like covering D.C.'s restaurant scene? It's got to be filled with challenges. There's so much perception versus reality happening.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe more so to the outside world than to people in DC. I think people in DC kind of know how good the food scene is. I think sometimes we take it a little bit for granted. And you know what? One thing that's interesting about DC is that there's a lot happening in the suburbs, and that used to not feel like it was quite as much the case. I used to say to people that when we were kind of justifying our coverage priorities, I used to say, I think people in the suburbs are more interested in what's happening in the city than the other way around. And I don't necessarily think that that's true anymore. And I think it's partly because of the pandemic and more people are staying at home. So they're not coming into the city for work. So they're looking around for great stuff where they live. And that can sometimes be a challenge. It's a pretty widespread area. Our restaurant critic, Tom Sietsema, has been doing an amazing job for a quarter of a century now. So he knows the scene really better than anybody else. And I think the challenge is just really keeping up and, that mix of covering the exciting new places, which everybody, sort of rushes to in a fever pitch of trendiness, while also reminding people of a lot of the things that have been around that maybe aren't even old enough to be considered, nostalgic classics, but just places that are cranking out great food year in and year out that people sometimes forget about because they're too interested in moving on to the next thing.
Well said, well said. So, Joe, you recently published this great story about how mega influencer Keith Lee, he quote unquote politely dunked on Washington, D.C. food. And I thought it was a great headline. I'm going to link to in the show notes. Great piece. This brings up a big question that we've been talking a lot on the show about. Where do you think legacy media outlets like the Washington Post and honestly Taste in some ways fit into this world where TikTok critics, they have so much sway? I mean, it's a moving target, and I'd love to get your take on how like legacy journalism fits into this new reality.
Yeah, it's a question that I think a lot of people are asking right now. I think in large part what we have to bring is credibility. We have experience, we have credibility, we have the power of our resources. We can afford to send a restaurant critic several times to a place with big parties of people. We can afford to send them, in disguise. We can afford to, for them to have credit cards and a lot of different names to not give people heads up that they're coming so they don't get special treatment. We can put things into context. We can tell people stories about restaurants. We can tell people, how a certain restaurant or a certain type of cuisine fits into the culture of a city like DC. Having said all that, I think what the TikTok critics show us is that there is no shortage of need for personality, and people are drawn to personality, and personality is powerful. And people like Keith Lee have built up his own kind of credibility because he is speaking to people in a way that I think they're not being spoken to by other media. I think that's why his following is so large. He speaks about the food in a very conversational way. He comes across as just like your best friend. And what does he think about restaurants? And you kind of get the idea that maybe you might agree with him. But I think one thing about criticism that's important to remember with all kinds of critics is that the most important thing for a reader is to understand the point of view of the critic and how it tends to compare to your own experience, right? So you kind of triangulate your own thoughts about restaurants off of the critics, and you get an idea when you follow somebody for a long time whether you're likely to agree or disagree with what he or she has to say, or different parts of it. Like you might get an idea that somebody is just obsessed with decor and you don't really care about decor, so you sort of you take all that with a grain of salt. You might realize that somebody maybe tends to like bigger portions than you, and so if they complain that the portions are too small, you kind of realize, well, that's probably not going to bother me. And I think Keith is the same. People look at what he likes, and they get an idea of whether that seems like it would be something that they would like or that they wouldn't like based on what he says.
So agree with this, Joe, and just so well said. Thank you for sharing the thoughts. And I don't want to dwell on this. We're gonna get to your book, but I just have to say, like, objectivity, having resources like a corporate credit card, being able to go anonymous. I mean, that's AI proof. That's really the work that I think a lot of readers enjoy, and really the fact that these are skilled professionals reviewing restaurants, be it in DC or LA or New York or wherever. Hug your critics, tip your critics. Like it's not an easy job. But I also will agree that I love the flavor and the personality of online critics and online observers, and the triangulation. Never thought about that. Really smart stuff.
And the other thing I'll just add really quickly, Matt, is that I think the other thing that it shows that we in legacy media need to remember is the importance of meeting people where they are and on the platform where they are. So meet them on their own terms. So he's meeting them on TikTok, and and his reviews are on TikTok. We in legacy media sometimes write about TikTok and we include TikTok, we embed TikTok videos, and we, talk about personalities on TikTok. But what we need to be doing more of is meeting people on TikTok. So bringing our criticism, we need to do a much better job at the Post and at a lot of places of bringing our restaurant criticism and that credibility and expertise to the platform where people are gathering.
It's a really tall order, just trying to match the aesthetic and the originality and the nativeness of guys like Kev Eats and Keith Lee and all these. So yeah, I mean we're really we have a huge challenge there, and so we being like the folks who've been doing this in legacy world, but I think we're up for it. And we all can benefit from making that change. On to your book. Let's go there. I mean, you write, quote, "You are interested in a myriad of ways to make plant-based meals delicious, vibrant in flavor, interesting in texture, wholesome and nourishing to eat, and perhaps less interested in claiming an identity." Now, I thought that this was so important to bring out right at the beginning of the book. I guess my first question is claiming a monolithic identity for quote-unquote vegan cuisine a trap?
Well, I think what's a trap is thinking that you have to claim some kind of identity in order to explore and learn about the cuisine. I don't think this made it into the book because I didn't think of this analogy until after I had turned in the manuscript or after the manuscript was edited. But I keep thinking about, how if you are interested in learning how to make the best Spanish paella, for instance, you don't feel like you have to renounce your American citizenship and, get a Spanish work visa in order to learn how to make paella. Now, if you want to visit, absolutely, go to Valencia, have some great paella, take some notes, and read some books and talk to people. In the same way, of course, you don't have to say that you're vegan or vegetarian or anything in order to be interested in making delicious plant-based food. And that's definitely one of the major messages of the book. I sort of wanted to sort of decouple it a little bit from the philosophy and the dogma. Now I have reasons why I eat a primarily plant-based diet, and I talk about them, and I'm not afraid to talk about them. But I also think that people have such varying reasons for being interested in this way of cooking. It might just be because of a member of their family. It might be because they had a health scare. It might be because they have ethical reasons. It might be, climate related. And it might be for one meal. It might be for a week. It might be one little dish they try in a restaurant. It might be for veganuary, a word that is hard for me to say.
I think you're workshopping it well. It will roll off the tongue eventually.
Thank you. You're coming to this from all different places. So what I wanted to do was really focus on the culinary, on the idea that it is a cuisine and that you would have lots of different reasons for wanting to learn about it. It might just be because you're a curious modern cook who likes to think that he or she, can be versed in a lot of different kinds of cooking. And this is just one of them.
Well, I think you do such a great job through the 300 recipes and all the great writing around it to expand our imagination for plant-based cooking beyond, what it's not. I think a lot of vegan cookbooks are dwelling on what it's not. So how did you think about this what it's not idea and kind of moving beyond that with this terrific book?
Well, a lot of that came out of my work at the Post. We write headlines for all our pieces. We workshop headlines. And one of the things that I've noticed a lot of other media do, and I have tried to really banish from my team's work, is a headline that says something about, how this dish is so good, quote, you won't miss the meat. And that just makes my skin crawl. And it's because exactly what you're saying, that it's defining a dish based on what's missing rather than what's there. I think it's a strange little double negative thing that we pull that I think somehow we think is going to justify it to people, but I think it sets up this idea that everything about the dish should otherwise be the same as the meaty dish. And so and it's an unfair comparison because the two things are just so different. I would say apples and oranges. Maybe I should say apples and bacon. Um, so what I think is important is to sell the food and appreciate the food for its own inherent qualities. So a mushroom bolognese, for instance, it isn't good because it doesn't have pork or milk in it. It's good because the mushrooms are good, because they taste really good. And I know that it's hard to fully escape references to animal-based products in all of plant-based cooking because those dishes are so ingrained in our culture. So even as I'm saying that about mushroom bolognese, I know that one of the common adjectives that we often use about mushrooms, and I do it too, is that they're meaty. So,
Yeah, everyone, it's a trap that it's like a bit of a hackneyed like trick that we try to pull in cookbook head note writing. But let's agree to ban the meaty mushrooms comparison. Let's do it.
All right, I have to go back and make a lot of blackouts in my book, I think.
No, I'm kind of joking because I think you need to like be descriptive and make people feel excited and of course meet people where they're at, which you mentioned about TikTok, and sometimes that word meaty works. I want to ask you about your contributors because I think the great unlock in this book is not just it's packed with Joe Yonan recipes, and you've written extensively in the post and about plant-based cooking, and you're so skilled at recipe development, but wow, you have a real incredible list of contributors: Bridget Washington, Alicia Kennedy, Ali Slagle, Nico Vera. I'm just naming just a few. And so let me ask you, how did you engage these contributors? And, what are some examples about what the contributors brought to the book?
This was such a fun part of the process for me, and really rewarding. I mean, honestly, I wanted to work with a lot of contributors because we wanted to do the book more quickly than I could do it all on my own because I have a full-time job. um, um, and so what my challenge then was to find people whose work not only, of course, spoke to the topic at hand, but also who I feel a certain, culinary kinship with. Because it's in some ways it's a conversation between us. They developed recipes based on pretty extensive brainstorming sessions with me. I first would reach out to someone and see if they were available, and I started with people that I know, people whose work I really love, whose recipes I was familiar with, and then if I knew they were available, then we got on this brainstorming call, and I basically sort of evangelized about the point of the book, the mission of the book. And then we started talking about what that kind of cooking, is to them. What do they already do? What have they been curious about? What kinds of things do they think? What did they think should be in the book? That was certainly, part of the conversation. And with a lot of people, I sort of had an idea. Well, I think with everybody, I had an idea of what their particular expertise and focus is, and I knew that I wanted that in the book. There were some developers who are more sort of general interest recipe developers, like Ali Slagle and Sarah Jampel and Joy Manning and Philly, and I just knew that they could probably do anything. Ali doesn't develop solely plant-based recipes, but she is great with salads and great with vegetables and just thinks about things in an interesting way. Then there are people like Alicia Kennedy, who I'm a longtime fan of and just love her work. And I've published some essays by her. And I knew that she has done recipe development and that she, used to own a vegan bakery, but that she hadn't really written very much about cooking. She hadn't really published many recipes. So I was curious about what she might bring. Somebody like Bridget Washington I'd worked with, and she specializes in Caribbean cooking. And I just knew there's a strong plant-based tradition there, but she's not a plant-based cook. And I just sort of brainstormed with them, and then the thing that was so great, Matt, was that they come back to me with these lists of recipes after we've sort of narrowed down what they might do, and I look at these recipes and I'm like, this I could have written this, meaning meaning this feels like me. Like we had such a mind meld that everything that came back kind of blew me away. I was like, wow, this really feels like me. And that was very important to me because I want the book to reflect my voice as well. And I feel like I need to be the thread that pulls everything together.
Well, such journalistic instincts there, and really by kind of having an open conversation, but also putting in a reporter hat and asking the right questions to call out these recipes. It's a real skill. You weren't just like submit recipes and we'll go from there. It's like to have a conversation is really really terrific. So, Joe, there's a lot of obvious contributors, and we've gone over that, but of course, there's a lot of Joe recipes in the book, and everyone who reads your columns and knows how you write, and especially Cool Beans, your previous book, you're just so talented yourself, and you're humble. But I'm just going to say you're one of the most gifted recipe developers out there, and it's really really cool that you're both an editor and developer. I mean, props to that. Give us a couple of Joe recipes, and dare I say, the ones that we should cook first, the ones that you're so happy to have in the book, and our listeners, when they buy the book, they should just like turn to that page.
One of my absolute favorites that just felt like when I came up with it, just this huge light bulb went off in my head, and I was so happy about it. I got a tahini ice cream recipe from Michael Rafiti, whom I mentioned earlier. He has this beautiful restaurant, Albi, beautiful sit down, upscale Palestinian restaurant, and he also has a bakery where he sells incredible baked goods with Middle Eastern touches, and he has this tahini soft serve that I tasted, and then he told me that it was vegan, and this is while I was looking for recipes for my book, and so I asked him to see it, and he sent it to me, and it's a great recipe. It's based on oat milk with tahini and a little cornstarch and sugar. It's very minimal ingredient list. But what occurred to me when I was thinking about other ice cream recipes that I wanted for the book was that I knew, tahini is just a nut butter. And one of my favorite ice creams is pistachio. And I also love hazelnut ice cream. I love a lot of ice creams.
Those are great choices.
Yeah,
I love a good pistachio.
Oh man,
Yeah.
I think it's my all-time favorite. And so I thought, well, tahini is a nut butter. Couldn't I take pistachios and turn them into pistachio butter and use that as the base of the ice cream? And then I thought, well, I've got these pistachios. Instead of using oat milk with the pistachios, why don't I just make pistachio milk and combine it with the pistachio butter? So basically, the recipe has 5 ingredients. It's nuts, sugar, water, salt, and it's fantastic because and vanilla. You take some nuts, you make a milk out of some of them, you roast some of them, you turn most of the roasted nuts into a butter, you hold some out to put back in the ice cream. You basically combine the nut butter with the nut milk and sugar and heat it up and dissolve it, and then you put it in your ice cream maker, and after it's almost churned, you fold in the nuts, and you save the rest for sprinkling on top. And it's just this double down, triple down uh, pistachio flavor. But then, of course, I realized that you can do it with hazelnut, you can do it with walnut, you can do it with pecan, with peanut, with sesame seeds, with pumpkin seeds. So yeah, that's one of my favorites.
Yeah, it sounds like when you can triple down on a flavor profile in any of these plant-based recipes, it really will be a benefit to really think about and strip it back a little bit and think about the essence. If we haven't noticed in this conversation, Joe, you're a Texan. You can hear it in your Texas transplant. You can hear it in your voice, and And really, I had to ask you about plant-based queso. You see it on menus at restaurants to various results, usually to the negative. And I'm just gonna say, Joe, this is a personal recipe. How did you come up with a plant-based queso that works?
I have very strong feelings about queso and making it, and I've been making it for decades, and the traditional Tex-Mex way of making it. And, I know there are purists out there who say there's nothing traditional about Tex-Mex cooking, and I would like to have a conversation with them at some point about it. But the traditional Tex-Mex way of making queso is to basically combine a block of Velveeta and a can or two of Rotel brand diced tomatoes with green chilies, and that's it. You microwave it, or you can do it on the stove. Most people just microwave it, and so I was realizing that so many of the vegan quesos that I was tasting, they just weren't based on that kind of spirit. I think they were maybe attempting to go back to something, maybe more traditionally Mexican. And don't get me wrong, like queso fundido in Mexico City is one of the, great dishes of the world. But I wanted that Tex-Mex feel. I wanted the stretchy, kind of creamy meltability that Velveeta brings. And I also realized that why would I try to reinvent the can of diced tomatoes with green chilies? So all I did was work on the cheese part, which is accomplished by our good old friends cashews, which can do all sorts of magic when combined in the right proportion with water. And the flavoring is nutritional yeast and a little potato starch. The potato starch is interesting because it gives it that kind of that stretchy feeling. It gives it that kind of starchy, stretchy gooiness that I think a lot of other quesos I think maybe don't have as much of. And then some turmeric for color, obviously. The Rotel tomatoes, a little more vinegar, a little miso for umami, and I mean, I think it's killer.
It sounds amazing, and I think putting a little miso in there for umami is very cool. And we shouldn't hide from our CPG friends, our friends at the grocery store. When they do it right, they do it right. And Rotel fits into the math for plant based. You got to reach for a Rotel. Joe, you quote unquote crack the code for a homemade veggie burger, and really. Those are some fighting words, and I love that you go into this book with some confidence. Because making a veggie burger at home, as anyone can attest who's attempted, can be tricky, but it also can be a real remarkable feat. Tell us about your own code cracking here.
Well, as you referenced, there are often veggie burgers with lots of problems, and either recipes people have made at home or certainly veggie burgers that they've gotten in restaurants. And just to be clear with people, we're talking about a veggie burger, a veggie burger with actual veggies in it, not a so-called tech burger, or not trying to to be the bleeding beat heart of a fake burger hamburger, which we'll get to that. I'm sure we will. But for a veggie burger that actually has discernible, delicious veggies in it, I think one of the big missteps that most people do is they puree something in a food processor. And the problem with that is that, you get this pureed feel when you eat the burger. So the even if you've coated it in something, or you've seared it and you've tried to get the outside, kind of firm, you bite into it between the buns and it squishes out. I mean, to me, a squishy veggie burger is just like, why am I eating this? It makes me angry. And so one trick is to just simply not use a food processor. Cut things by hand, mash things by hand. It's kind of like making homemade guacamole. You want texture. So that's the one trick. The other one that I really like to do that I think makes a big difference is I bake the veggie burgers first, and it helps set them. So, the two extremes of bad veggie burgers are it's either squishy, like I said, or often it's just so dry it falls apart. So I fixed the squishy part by not using food processor, and then I fix the so dry it almost falls apart by, well, adding some binders, but also baking them first, and it sets the burger. And then you can eat them like that. They're perfectly great. Or you can crisp them up in a skillet in the pan, and you can also freeze them from the baked state and then pull them right out of your freezer and pan fry them from frozen. So they're they're pretty great. And mine is a combination of mushroom. It's built on mushrooms, beans, and nuts, basically. So you've got really great texture. You can swap out the kinds of nuts and the kinds of mushrooms and the kinds of beans, but you've got these really great textural variations. And then you've got spices, and of course you've got onion and garlic, your aromatics. You've got a little liquid aminos, which I really like, which are kind of like a soy sauce, a hippie soy sauce, for lack of a better word. You have a little binder, flour or chickpea flour. You've got our good friend nutritional yeast again. You've got some acid in there to help keep it from tasting too, sort of earthy, and give it a little tang. And the thing about my recipe is that I give you a lot of ideas for how to customize it. So you can switch out the spices, mushrooms, the beans, the nuts, the acid, the condiments, and turn them kind of Southwest, or you can make them kind of curried, or you can make them Mediterranean. Those are the three that I have in the book.
Well, structure is everything, and you really nailed it on the head with all the real problems with our veggie burger at home universe, and really making sure that you think about structure. And also, I just to add, like the idea that you can do it in batches and do 25 of them, eat 8 of them for your meal, and then have a bunch left over to freeze so you can pull them out and grill them. I love that tip. It's so smart, and I really hope we could publish that recipe on Taste. I'd love to do that. So I want to transition a little bit and talk about this fake meat world we live in. You're so qualified to answer this question because you haven't just written a book about plant-based cooking, but you also report on business, being the editor at the Washington Post. So you really can give us a sense of this Beyond Burger moment. I mean, if you just look at the Beyond stock price, we've gone from a high well above $200 a share, and we're sitting at $6 here in early September. And that to me says something. But I want to get your opinion about Impossible Beyond, what it's done to our culture, what it hasn't done to our culture.
I mean, I think it's been an important development. I don't think we've seen the last of them, by the way. I wouldn't count them out. They've continued to iterate in interesting ways, but I think what we saw was just maybe a little bit too inflated of an excitement from the business and investor community about a product without realizing maybe what most people really want. And one thing that's interesting about Impossible and Beyond is that they never really targeted, particularly from the beginning, they came out saying that they were targeting omnivores, not vegans and vegetarians. They were targeting people who maybe wanted to nudge their diet away from beef, one burger at a time, but not people who have claimed this identity. And I think part of that is because, a lot of people who are vegetarian and vegan, depending on why you chose that diet, you may not actually be that into the idea of a burger that seems really, really close to an actual meat burger. I came fairly late in my life to it, so I'm not horrified by the idea of a meat burger. I just don't want to eat one. So I don't mind something that's trying to be one. I think one of the missteps, one of the misjudgments was in the idea that people wouldn't be bothered by the highly, highly ultra processed nature of them. So I think that has been part of what has, sort of taken the shine off of these products. People thinking, well, do I really want the choice to be between a beautiful, grass-fed beef burger where I know the farmer, I'm buying it at the farmer's market, or a product that has 20 ingredients. I think that the more apt comparison is between, a burger at McDonald's and an Impossible or Beyond Burger. I think that's the better comparison to make. I think it's the people who, are eating a lot of McDonald's burgers that we want to get to probably eat more Impossible and Beyond Burgers. But I guess I would say largely that, it's been a cultural moment. I think it only bodes, well for further developments in this area. I think they've learned some things. I think they're iterating. Beyond came out with a revision of its burger recently, just within the last 6 months or so, that has many fewer ingredients, and the fat level is better, and so I think that's kind of interesting. Um, but meanwhile, I think they're also inspiring. Their initial success, anyway, I think is inspiring a lot of people to just look at a lot of other ways at this. So yeah, you've got everything from the cultured meat, which has its own problems with scalability and everything, to some really interesting, experiments and developments with using mushrooms and with replicating dairy, molecularly. So basically creating milks and cheeses that are chemically identical to dairy, but they just didn't need to use the animal. Um, I think we're still going to see a lot of impacts from the initial success and excitement around Impossible and Beyond.
Absolutely. Well said, Joe. And really, I am inviting folks from both Impossible and Beyond Meat onto the show to talk about it because I really want to get their take as well. And I think you closed with a little bit of a chestnut about cultured meat, test tube meat, meat grown in labs, and how the stigma around it is going to rapidly change as consumer products end up hitting the shelves. And I think we both will be following this story. It's a really good one, and definitely how it rolls into fast casual, QSR, all that kind of restaurant world. So the main section, the section that really it says these are the dishes that you can put at the center of the table. I mean, it speaks to me, and I think we all want to tackle this with our plant-based cooking. We want to not just have like a couple sides and then have like a big animal product at the center, but we really want to do all plant-based and have this beautiful centerpiece. And really, one recipe out of many that speaks to me is this trumpet mushroom au poivre with cashew cream. But I want to zoom out a little bit. How did you think about the plant-based mains?
Well, I think you touched on part of it, definitely, Matt, with just, it can just be fun to be able to focus on something and have like a big platter of something to really sort of sink your teeth into, literally, but also to pull out a knife and fork. I think that sometimes, when you're eating plant-based food, it can become a little bit bowl heavy,
Mushy, Joe. It's mushy.
It can be mushy. You can feel like you're eating salads all the time, or you can feel like you're eating grain bowls all the time. And there's just something satisfying about being able to use your knife and fork and really dig into something. And so what I was trying to do in this chapter was just show people that, well, among other things, I think the trumpet mushrooms au poivre, what it shows is that in a lot of cases, the reason that we enjoy some of these classic dishes is less about the meat and more about all the flavoring that went with it. So what we like about steak au poivre is the au poivre. I would just say, it's not one of those dishes where you're it's a heavy sauce. It's a powerfully flavored sauce. I think when you eat it, it's been a long time since I've had steak au poivre, but I think when you eat it, you're mostly tasting the sauce. It's not one of those dishes that's like showcasing the qualities
I
of
mean,
the
it's
steak,
usually just a
right?
hanger or a lesser cut of a beef. It's usually a pretty cheap cut. Yeah.
Right. So it's pretty easy to, stick with that approach and use it with something like a mushroom and just show that just how delicious it is. I mean, it's a cashew cream, which is really easy to make. It's brandy. It's, butter, it's pepper, it's Dijon mustard, it's got some lemon and parsley. It's just delicious. And I think that just shows that so many of the times what we're drawn to are all the seasonings and flavors of something.
It's
Not
such a great call, Joe. And
Yeah.
and I think say we're having a dinner party or cooking for our family, and we've budgeted that we're gonna have like a centerpiece protein when we're shopping. We've got some money set aside for a nice steak. Well, switch the mindset, and you're at your farmer's market, you're looking at all those beautiful mushrooms, or at your grocery store, and you're like, what do I want to do with all these? They are not cheap, and that's okay. But like, buy a clutch of king oyster, or any mushrooms you like. It could be lion's mane even, and like, think about it as a centerpiece. And I think switching the mindset about budgeting, and like, this can actually be a main, and using this great sauce as like the accent.
Yes, absolutely. I think this would actually be really, I didn't put it in the book, but I think this would actually be really fun to do as a whole maitake roast too, where you take like, a big bunch of maitake and you trim it, but you leave the bottom connected, and then you roast it whole and serve it with this sauce. I was just thinking about that the other day, that I might try that. So it would be even more of a plattered centerpiece.
I think a lot of our friends in the chef community have taken advantage of those whole roasted mushrooms. I love it. Well, we've gone over several recipes, and there's like, obviously like 295 more. But I want to close by asking you about this promise, mastering the art. How do you do this with a cookbook? How do we engage with this book that you've created? How do we, I mean, it could be intimidating to some. You see, I have 300 recipes. Where do I start? But Joe, tell us, how do we use this book to actually master the art of plant-based cooking?
Well, you know what they say about how do you get to Carnegie Hall, right? Practice, practice, practice,
That's
Matt.
it.
Well, the reason I bring that up is that, the title uses the word mastering. It's a gerund, it's always ongoing. And that's the idea that, it's a process. It's always a process. So, I don't know that you get to the point where you stop. But I think you started to quote unquote master it when you feel confident when you're cooking, especially when you feel confident enough maybe to start to riff on things. You want some dish a little less spicy the next time, or maybe you want to switch out a whole head of broccoli for the romesco, because you know what the similar qualities and differences they are. So I would say the best way to work through the book to kind of get a handle on the book is honestly to look at something that maybe surprises you, that feels accessible to you, that feels like it's something that you would like to make, that's something that you would like to eat, and then it doesn't seem too intimidating to you in the instructions, and start there, and read the recipe through and through, and make it, and see if you want to make it the same way next time, if you want to make some tweaks to it. I do have a huge building blocks chapter. And so there are many things in that chapter that can help you sort of get into plant-based cooking. You can use many of them with the recipes in the book. You can use many of them, all of them really, for many other things. These are milks and creams and spices and sauces and crisps and toppings and the like. But I don't want to tell people that they need to go through the entire building blocks chapter and then figure out, what they're going to use with those building blocks, because that feels like a project. And I don't know about you, but I don't want another project probably.
You want to have some fun when you're thinking about dinner. Yeah, I totally agree.
Say you're going to dip in, if you're really interested in salads, that's a super strong chapter. The desserts, of course, if you've got a sweet tooth, definitely pick up something. I think it could be interesting to try something that maybe you didn't think initially could really be done in a plant-based way, just to sort of surprise you. Like there's a sweet potato creme brulee, for instance, that's a super accessible recipe, and it would just show you that, oh wow, like I can get this creamy, sweet, crackly top combo without making a custard. Some of those, and then branch out.
Joe, on This Is Taste, we ask guests about their discerning taste. So to close this interview, here's a little rapid fire, fast and furious taste check. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
The best fruit.
Peach.
Oh my God, of course. Has it been a good season? It's been a good season up here in New York.
It's been great. Not in my front yard. It hasn't been great. But I think my peach tree is dying, but that's another story.
That's another story. That's the next project is your botany book. All right, you have to answer this question. I know it's going to be kind of challenging, but Joe, the worst vegetable.
Spaghetti squash.
Thank you, my man. You came to play. It's a really, really bad one. It's a really, really bad one.
It can be cooked well. It's hard not to make it super watery. I just don't love how watery it is. Watery and stringy. And I think people tried this whole pasta substitution so forcefully that all of us tried it and we're like, I don't think so. And yeah, I just don't love it. Now, have I had it? Have I had it in ways that I like it? Sure. Yeah.
So the book maybe doesn't have a lot of zoodles recipes.
No.
You're saying
there is a cauliflower rice in there.
the best dessert.
Fruit pie.
Okay, a little more, please.
Rhubarb.
Oh yeah, and you make it yourself in those spring months.
Yes. Rhubarb with nothing else. Not strawberry rhubarb, not blue barb. Rhubarb.
If you have the product there, yeah, you can do wonders with just a straight rhubarb. I love that call. Your favorite plant-based restaurant?
Oyster in Washington, D.C.
I haven't made it yet, but it's certainly on my list. What's a dish there that comes to mind that you think really embodies its ethic?
Well, the one that they've had on from the beginning, which just never gets old, is this little opener they do that's fried kind of ribbons of celery root that are well, it comes out looking like it's a little ball. It looks like a tumbleweed, honestly, Matt. It comes out looking like a small tumbleweed, and it's these thin ribbons of celery root that have been curled around a filling, and the filling is smoked tofu, and it's silky, and you get this crunch when you bite. It's a one bite thing. You get the crunch when you bite into it. You get the creamy smoking it, and of course they make their own tofu and they smoke their own tofu, and it's everything is from scratch. So it's incredible.
Well, I haven't plugged this yet, but I want to do it. Make sure I get it in. You have to subscribe to the Washington Post for the food section so you can read all the articles. I subscribe myself. I pay for it. It's so worth it. I didn't say that at the jump, but really you'll get all these great recipes that Joe's talking about, not the book, but many of the columns that like Daniela and Aaron, all the crew you have, and also this great restaurant coverage. It's a terrific section. Your favorite cookbook of all time?
This was the hardest question, Matt. I don't appreciate this question, Matt. This question makes me think too hard. All right, today I'm going to say Asian Tofu by Andrea Nguyen.
One of her first books. It's been beloved for, I would say, over a decade. I love it. It goes into the process of making tofu, but also cooking with it. Why do you love it?
Yeah, I mean, she showed the incredible, diverse culture of tofu, really for the first time, I think, in an English-speaking book. So English language book. The book does not speak, although it does speak to me. It speaks to me.
Good one there.
Yeah, she just shows the incredible diversity of tofu and also demystifies it and helps you understand the incredible varieties that are out there. And if you want to make it, she shows you how to make it, all sorts of different styles of tofu, and just, I don't know, she celebrates it in a way that's very accessible, and it also shows that it was never meant to be a meat substitute. It's valued for its own qualities in Asian cooking, and that's a philosophy that I try to bring to all my plant-based cooking too.
Love Andrea. Great call there. We're in the middle of a very busy cookbook season. Your book is part of it. I'm sure you're working on a big preview for the Post. But tell me, a recent favorite cookbook discovery of yours?
So the one that I'd like to talk about, it's so interesting and coincidental, really, that it came out today, which is my pub day, which is September 3rd. And it's called Big Vegan Flavor. It's by Nisha Vora. She's the incredible mind behind an Instagram account and blog called Rainbow Plant Life. And it's stunning. It shares somewhat of a mission with my book, in that it's setting out vegan cooking as something that you can master, and showing you good techniques and great flavor combinations. It's different than mine because she doesn't do as many, like the from scratch tofu and tempeh and miso and the like, but she gets into really cool things like all the different ways you can cut tofu to get different effects. So a recipe that I'm about to spotlight of hers in the post uses grated tofu, and it's just a fantastic technique. And you grate the tofu, and it lets you cook it in a pan at pretty high heat and kind of let it sear and sit there, and it gets all crispy. And then you add this incredibly powerful sauce to it, and it becomes something that you could eat, like, on lettuce wraps, or really anywhere, bowls, sandwiches, and the like. But she has a lot of really great kind of primers like that in the book, and she has really fun sort of equations in the book. It's a little salt, fat, acid, heat esque in that way. So I'm loving it.
I love that pick, and I love this grated technique. It reminds me of like our ultimate. We're always searching for like the yuba texture. We can't always find tofu skins, and it sounds like it's a great. I'm gonna check that book out. I was not that familiar with it. So great.
You'll love it.
I love it. Your favorite city outside America to visit for food?
Mexico City.
Oh my gosh. What do you go for first there if you're seeking out a dish?
Beans.
Of course. And it really is Mexican cuisine is really a treasure when it comes to cooking legumes and beans. And really, I didn't mention Cool Beans, your last book, which is a real favorite of ours here. And I know we've covered it on Taste in the past, and it's a terrific book. And I'm going to link to an interview we did with you all about beans. You're a real master there. Last one, your favorite sandwich.
Classic Southern tomato sandwich, Matt.
Oh, man.
Soft white bread, thickly sliced tomatoes, thick spread of mayonnaise. To be traditional and classic, Duke's. To be plant-based, easily do just mayo. I got the blessing for that from Southern cookbook writer Virginia Willis, who volunteered it to me. She said, I really like vegan mayo with this Southern tomato sandwich. I was like, thank you.
Great cosign there.
But the key to me is, and then just salt and pepper, right? The key to me is that the tomato needs to be cut to the same thickness as the piece of bread. And there's only one layer of tomato in the sandwich. This is very important, Matt. There's no slices overlapping each other in a classic Southern tomato sandwich. No, because then they slide away. No, it's thick piece of bread. It's half-inch piece of soft white bread as you're coming up the sandwich from the bottom, a tablespoon of mayonnaise, a half-inch slice of tomato that covers, ideally, it's a big enough slice of tomato that it can cover the entire piece of bread. Then another tablespoon of mayonnaise, and then the other half-inch piece of bread with salt and pepper.
Sounds perfect, and you're preaching structure once again. Structure is super important with sandwiches. I love this. I love this conversation, Joe. I want you to join us in the studio soon, and we can talk about many other things. Thank you so much for joining This Is Taste.
Oh, thanks for having me, Matt. This was a blast.
Liza, what is up? It's time to talk about three things. What is your first thing?
My first thing is a book recommendation from our lovely producer, Clayton. It is a book called Arbitrary Stupid Goal by Tamara Shopson, which is not new, but new to me after seeing it in bookstores for a while. I love this book. Tamara Shopson is one of the children of the legendary restaurant Shopsons in New York. And the book is really about growing up in Greenwich Village in the 70s, like in and out of her family's restaurant. I think as someone who lives in New York, I always am interested in thinking about the history of the city and the different eras that came before. But certainly from a food perspective, this book is so great. And one of the things that I think really stuck with me is just kind of talking about the specific era where restaurants could really rely on having regulars and the lengths that her father specifically would go to avoid people finding out about the restaurant. The media started finding out about how great this like little hole in the wall was, and they would call in and he would just hang up the phone on them or say that they didn't exist. Like he was kind of uniquely dedicated to preserving this place for locals and regulars and like not having it be so hyped or kind of change the character of what it was, which I think is just very different than the way that most restaurants in New York operate, at least today, because of rent and so many other factors. So I just loved reading this book.
I really want to read this now, and really, Kenny Shopson is an absolute icon of New York City food and dining, and really, there's a terrific documentary about Shopson and the closing of it, probably available on streaming. And Tamra is an incredible illustrator and graphic artist too, and I love that. There's probably, the covers are great, but like there's some of that sensibility happening too.
Yeah, there's lots of little doodles in the pages, which is nice as well. And it's funny because I remember going to the Shopson's version of the restaurant that existed in the older Essex Market, and now there actually is one in the new Essex Market as well. But that wasn't even in that was in the beginning of what that restaurant was. That was a later version. And so I think going back to the core and the roots is interesting as well.
Yeah, and he had like 1,000 menu items, literally, on that menu.
Yeah.
That's a great. I love that. I mean, one day there'll be more written about Shopson. What a cool spot.
Yeah. What's your first thing?
Well, I have also a New York City restaurant, three things. I got to go to Il Titano last night. It is the valiant return of Harold Dieterle to the New York City restaurant scene. And I'm so impressed. I had a great meal, and Harold's going to be on the show soon. Harold is the winner of Top Chef Season 1. Do you know Harold's work? Have you heard of him?
I've heard of him in the context of Top Chef, but not beyond it.
Harold's a really accomplished chef. You know, he ran, I think, two of my favorite restaurants in New York. One was called Perilla, and the other was Kinshop, and they were both singular in their approach. I mean, Kinshop was his play on Thai cooking, and then Perilla had a New American root to it when New American food was really exploding. But Il Titano is all about Sicily. And the guy has done his research, and over the years, I've always enjoyed his pastas, and really they stand out here. I was able to try spaghetti and blue crab, and also a bucatini special with sapressata, and really he's cooking these pastas so perfectly. The room is bustling. It's in the former Flex Muscle space on West 13th Street, so it's in a townhouse, and I love that space. I was a huge fan of Flex Muscles when it was open there, and really the highlight for me was actually a salad. We're in late summer, so he was doing a raw corn salad with like a Caesar and a sesame pecorino frico involved, and I just thought that was such a terrific salad. And really check out Il Titano, and again we'll have Harold on and we'll talk all about his time on Top Chef, when Top Chef was a thing that nobody knew about, and also this terrific restaurant.
Yeah, I love that. That would be such a fun episode.
What's your next three thing?
My next is that I just got to go to 886 to try Eric Z's new menu that he's doing there, which was just so much fun. I went with a big group of people, including our friend Elise Inamine, who contributes to Taste, was just on the podcast, the chef Jesse Uchan, and then a couple of my friends who cook with the pop-up See You Soon that were in town. So we got to try a lot of what was on the new menu, and I thought it was really great. Some of my favorites were there. He's doing like a dry version of a Taiwanese beef noodle soup. So it has all of those same flavors, just without the broth, which was really nice for this kind of warm end of summer weather that we've been having. Also, this crazy dessert that I think is the first dessert they've done before, which is a sweet potato ball that's stuffed with like molten salted egg custard that oozes out when you bite into it. They also just got their liquor license, which is exciting because the menu is really kind of food that's designed to be paired with alcohol. And so now there's whiskey and like all kinds of things like beyond the kind of lighter ABV they were doing previously. And I just think it's a really fun spot. And it was a really great like group meal to all kind of huddle around a table together and just cover it with really delicious Taiwanese food.
I love this mention, and I've been following the evolution of 886 for the years even before Eric was there. But Eric C is such a talented chef in New York City, and also just an incredible personality on YouTube. I remember a super memorable Chef's Night Out on Vice that he was the focus of, and really I love the way he thinks about cooking, and he travels to Taiwan quite a bit, and I've followed him on Instagram, and I'm so happy that there's a new evolution to try, and I'm absolutely going to make it there this fall.
Yeah, it's really great. And actually, I think we should have Eric on the show because he was leaving the restaurant to go cook at Brooklyn Mirage for like a giant EDM concert that was happening, which I don't think you could pay me enough money in the world to do, but he seemed to be excited. So I'd love to hear about what it was like cooking for people in that environment and, of course, the new menu and everything else as well.
Yeah, he's a real talented guy. I love Eric.
What's your next thing?
My next thing is a cookbook, and we're in the midst of fall cookbook season. We've had these previews going. We have many more to go, but I just got one delivered. It was on my desk when I arrived this morning, and I couldn't put it down. I was so excited. It's Rami Gill's India. And I love Rami and really a little bit about the author. She's a member of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire, which means she got like a sword put on her shoulder. But really, I think like she's a chef, a TV personality, a presenter, and somebody in the UK at least is a leading light in Indian cooking and travel, and her book Zakaya focused on vegan Indian cooking, and On the Himalayan Trail was more of a reportage style documentary work, and it won an IACP award. This book goes to her home kitchen, and it's all focused on home cooking. And in the intro and in the recipes that I was able to scan, it's clear that, she comes from Punjabi roots, but she lived in West Bengal. And like those are two very specific and different regions of India. So she's able to kind of talk about both very fluently. And there's a whole paneer chapter that I'm excited to cook from. A masala omelet sticks out to me, and I hope to have Rami on the show at some point. Really, really talented chef and writer here.
Yeah, that would be so great.
What's your last one?
My last one is that I just went to check out a newer, I guess, wine bar in Brooklyn called Rodeo. That's kind of over in Flatbush Crown Heights area, and I thought it was really sweet. I think the interior is really beautiful. They have like a whole open window right when you walk up, which is really nice for kind of summer into fall, and also some booths. It feels almost like you're in Paris or something like that. There is not a mechanical bull, unfortunately, at Rodeo, but there is just great wine and a couple snacks as well, including this French onion dip that I believe Anthony Ha from Hasdak Biet developed because they consulted on the menu a little bit. And I just thought it was a really sweet place to have a drink, especially if you're kind of over in that area. So I wanted to give it a shout on the show.
Thanks for shouting it out. And really, we've talked about the evolution of the wine bar in cities in America on the show. We had John Fine on. We're going to have John Bonet on soon to talk about it. And it's just such an exciting movement to see how wine bars are iterating in cool ways. And now we've got Rodeo to go to. It's such a great example and really cool, Eliza.
Yeah, it was awesome. Do you have one more to share?
I sure do. And I kind of rarely give podcast recommendations in here, not because I don't listen to other podcasts, because I do, I love them, but because I don't think anyone wants to like hear about more podcasts on a podcast, a little meta. But I couldn't resist with the return of Peter Kafka with a new podcast called Channels. And Peter is somebody who I've always read, and also loved his old show called Recode Media. And what I like about Peter is that he's like a really sourced and really expert media observer, But really, media is not just for media members to care about. Media is how our world works, and media isn't just print media. It's everything from streaming to the AI takeover to social media to media antitrust, and this all affects us as consumers of anything. And Peter has such a crystal clear voice on these with his interviews and with his commentary, and I'm going to link to it in the show notes because I love Peter Kafka's podcasts and love that he's back with one called Channels.
Yeah, I will have to check it out. I feel like a good podcast rec is worth having.
Well, thanks for sharing your 3 things, Eliza.
Yeah, you too.
This is Taste is hosted by Eliza Abarbanel and me, Matt Rodbard. The show is produced by Shalia Harris and Pat Stango and edited by Clayton Gumbert. Theme music by Steve Rydell. Visit Taste online at tastecooking.com and make sure to subscribe to our newsletter for updates on all cool things that are happening.